Good evening. Welcome to the show tonight. The hypocrisy over Anthony Albanese and Chris Bowen pretending to be climate change heroes while taking two separate private jets to a renewable energy announcement last week. Well, Liz Storer and Joe Hildebrand would join me to rip into these political pretenders in a moment. Also tonight, bombshell allegations from a former Channel 7 insider and how this explosive evidence came to light at the 11th hour. I'll speak with legal affairs expert Chris Merritt about the emergency hearing to be held in Bruce Lehrmann's defamation trial against Network 10 tomorrow. Plus, the Australian Museum's decision to welcome an archaeologist who has made clearly offensive remarks about Jews. I'll tell you what they have to say about this tonight. And despite calls for the Prime Minister to reverse the decision to strip former Home Affairs Secretary Mike Pizzullo of his Order of Australia, well, Albanese has just shrugged off all responsibility. The first government response to this scandal, I'll bring you tonight. First, let's go to this story that's made news since Ben Fordham broke it this morning. The Prime Minister and Anthony Albanese and Energy Minister Chris Bowen facing massive backlash after it was revealed that they took two separate private jets to the same event last week. This just days ago on Thursday. And worst of all, it was a renewable energy announcement. They were headed to the Hunter Valley from Canberra on Thursday. Instead of saving money, time and fuel, they could have driven. They could have caught the train, a bus, even their Comcars, private chauffeurs. God forbid they could have had the press conference in Canberra. They didn't need to go to the Hunter Valley at all. But it appears that the two caught separate private jets, an estimated cost to taxpayers of more than $100,000. Here was Chris Bowen struggling, trying to defend this utter waste of taxpayer money today.
The Prime Minister has a large jet available to him. That would normally be what we take. The runway at Scone wasn't strong enough to take the large jet, so the Air Force recommended and took the decision for two small jets.
It was impossible for you to go together in the one plane.
Even the small jets weren't fully laden because of the weight restrictions on the. Even if we had. With the Prime Minister's security detail and other people involved, going from, as you'd imagine, the Prime Ministerial visit, two cabinet ministers. We limited the number of staff, and even then, that was the Air Force advice, the most efficient way of getting us there.
The way he makes it sound, this was the reasonable course of action. But look at the small jets that Chris Bowen was talking about there. I mean, he makes it sound like they were just small helicopters. They're massive planes. They can take, I'm told by sources who've been on those planes, at least 14 people each. So why do Chris Bowen and Anthony Albanese need 14 staff, more than 14 staff between the two of them, just for a press conference? It wasn't even a major announcement. It was simply a photo opportunity. And the worst part about all of this isn't just the waste of taxpayer funds, that it's more than $100,000. It's the hypocrisy. It's that Chris Bowen has been saying that you're going to have to pay more money for your petrol cars into the future, thousands and thousands of dollars more money. It's effectively a car tax, a ute tax, because he wants to rush the transition to electric vehicles. Nothing wrong with electric vehicles, but he's trying to rush the transition by making everyone else, and it might not suit your family lifestyle, it might not suit your business to have an electric vehicle. You might say there's not enough charging stations around the country at the moment. So he's trying to rush the transition by making everyone else pay more money for regular cars when we know cars cost more money in Australia for the exact same vehicle than elsewhere in the world because we pay extra taxes. We pay more because of the transportation costs of getting the vehicles to Australia in the first place. Car prices have skyrocketed since COVID, but this man, Chris Bowen, wants to tax everyone else to try and save the planet. But look at what he's doing himself. The hypocrisy. Chris Bowen. Shocker. And yet the Herald reported today that he fancies himself a leadership contender. Please. All right, let's bring in now Sky News host Liz Storer and contributor Joe Hildebrand. I hope that
I think I'm across your position. I think I'm across your position.
Would Joe?
It's not a great look, is it?
This is hypocrisy, and both of them pretend to care about the environment. They want everyone else to pay for the environment, but not themselves.
Yeah, look, I think, as usual, I'm going to disappoint everyone by sort of coming in somewhere in the middle here. Hear me out. I think, look, there is an argument, you know, a Prime Minister's time is precious. We don't expect them to drive or take the bus like the rest of us, and they do have to get to places
faster. A commercial flight is $208
to Newcastle.
$208.
I saw Bridget McKenzie who said that is absurd. Newcastle and Scone are a 2-hour drive away. You might as well not take a plane at all if you're going to fly to Newcastle and then get in the car for 2 hours.
But you mean to tell me there wasn't a more affordable option between private jets and some sort of commercial arrangement?
The PM has Air Force One. He has his own jet. So unless you're calling for that to be taken away, because the PM
One,
has to,
by the way, Toto One.
The PM has to take an Uber everywhere.
Everyone else has to queue up in airport queues, but the Prime Minister, he's so out of touch.
He's the leader of the country. He's not like everyone else.
Everyone's busy.
Having said that, taking two, you know, as Lady Bracknell said, you know, or to paraphrase her perhaps, to take one private jet may be necessary, but to take two looks like carelessness. And why you wouldn't, I mean, the Prime Minister's security detail, I'm pretty sure I'm not giving away any national security details, is not 14 protective services officers. So I cannot for the life of me understand why they couldn't have got everyone on one private jet, or indeed some of the other staffers, you know, could have gone a slower way, just so you didn't have that awful, awful image. I mean, anyone who knows anything about this issue knows that climate change and private jets do not go together. Every time Prince Harry jumps on one, every time they all rock into Davos, it's a horrible, horrible, horrible look. And frankly, for two smart men, they should have known better.
Liz Dora?
Especially when you're going there to say, and this is what he said after his energy minister and himself flew there on two separate private jets, it is not negotiable. It is necessary. Talking about net zero. I mean, do me a favour, mate. I love these kind of stories because it shows up the complete hypocrisy. You just go, oh, well, clearly the emergency's over, if there ever was one, because they want everyone else to believe that there's an emergency and everything matters. Every minute detail of your life now matters, and we will dictate to you what your emissions footprint is and all this nonsense while they jet around like it doesn't matter. Also, how tone deaf can you be in the middle of a cost of living crisis, splurging $100,000 of taxpayer money, hard-earned dollars by you and I and everybody else out there? The median wage in this country is just $65K. That's more than most people ever hope to earn in a year. And you just splurged it on having your staffers and all your security guys pack into two jets. It is completely inexcusable. How much respect would these men garner if they actually took the low road, if they had done this presser, not out in the Hunter Valley, but in Canberra? And if anyone wanted explanations for that, they could simply say, we are saving the taxpayer money. Because when I ran an organisation that was completely donor funded, I behaved like it. I didn't catch business class. I respected the fact that every single dime I wasn't earning, it was off the backs of people who believed in the cause. And when every single cent you're spending is taxpayer money, why don't you show us the respect that we deserve while you're spending the money that we've earned? It's disgusting.
I mean, a lot of people talk about, no one more so than Anthony Albanese himself talks about his humble upbringings. And it is an incredible story, but he has been in politics for more than 2 decades now, and nothing shows that he's become more out of touch than something like this, where they don't give a second thought about taking 2 private jets, massive waste of money. Joe?
Yeah, I think clearly their brains just weren't functioning properly.
They're just used to the lifestyle of
that's
private
right. That's right. I don't think they thought, let's just take all the private jets we can.
No, they
just didn't think. And look, again, the Prime Minister is always going to have special travel, special accommodation.
They just didn't think. They talk about nothing else but the climate emergency and making ridiculous policies that everybody else has to bleed out of every orifice to afford, Joe. So you can't say, they just weren't thinking.
But the PM has also taken ownership of that electric vehicle program and brought it down so that it doesn't.
The electric vehicle program is actually the least of our problems. What they have done to the energy prices in this country in the name of their green dream is abhorrent. And for them to be behaving like this while everybody else is paying for their ridiculous policies.
Clearly, we do need to manage
sub-story, though, is that because
this is not the way to demonstrate
because the Prime Minister came in and stepped on Chris Bowen's toes in trying to clean up his electric vehicle mess. I think there was some suggestion in the reports today that there might have been tensions, and that might have been why they were taking separate planes.
They're not talking to each other.
Oh, great.
I wouldn't have thought so.
That's why we had to pay $100K.
I wouldn't have thought so. The PM, Chris Bowen, pardon me, I can assure you, are very, very close. They were both part of, their alliance, their allegiances to each other, both date back to Team Rudd about 15 more years ago, when and Julia Gillard, of course, famously...
When they rolled Beazley.
They did roll Kim Beazley, and then when Gillard and her supporters rolled Kevin Rudd, the price for Bowen's loyalty to Rudd was that he was made immigration minister and so forced to eat a certain type of sandwich. And maybe when he's going out and defending the private jets, he's thinking, this sandwich tastes slightly familiar.
Exactly. Well, Bowen had another shocker today. He tried to defend Labor's over-reliance on confidentiality agreements. Remember last week, I brought you the report that Labor was forcing companies, industry lobby groups, stakeholders to sign secrecy provisions, non-disclosure agreements before being even able to look at policy documents. And also Tanya Blibasek had industry groups leave their mobile phones out of the room before coming in to look at her nature-positive legislation. So there was a lot of pressure on the government to explain why they were using this non-disclosure agreement at a regular basis when they promised transparency from opposition. Well, when questioned about it today, here's what Chris Bowen had to say.
Car companies came to us and said they wanted to share commercial and confidence data with the government and asked for the negotiations or the consultations to be held in that light. And so we agreed to that, and therefore there were those sorts of agreements entered into. But also in terms of the vehicle efficiency standards, there were 2 public consultation papers, thousands of submissions. There was also the preferred model put out, thousands of submissions, all public, all worked through. So there will always be a combination of public consultation and private consultations.
I mean, Liz, Chris Bowen there blaming the car manufacturers, but the reality is this use of NDAs is right across the board in the government.
Yes.
And I would like to hear from the car manufacturers because I'm sure they didn't beg for NDAs before looking at the legislation.
No. And there's ways to make that portion, if indeed the story is true, confidential while not getting everyone to sign gag orders before they're simply coming to a meeting with the government to discuss future policy. We heard the same from people who were having meetings with the government who were from the disability sector, and they were like, why do we have to sign off on all these NDAs? And what a joke this is, coming from a government who said till they were blue in the face that their middle name was going to be transparency, transparency, transparency before they got into government. That is the exact opposite of what we're seeing here. And the obvious question is, what is so bad that you have to hide? Why all these gag orders? Why can't these people come in, talk to you about the future of policy, what they'd like to see? Most of them are service providers of some kind. What is the need for the kind of secrecy? Obviously, you have closed-door discussions when actually writing the policies before you take it to the House, before you're actually getting a bill in black and white. These are simply consultative meetings. So what is so bad that you're requiring these people who are basically coming in for a chat and to give their thoughts and to exchange different stats, how their business is going, give you suggestions? Why on earth do they have to sign these NDAs?
Yeah, exactly. Now, meanwhile, the government's under pressure over what's being dubbed in the media Trump-style laws, where they would ban completely visitors or tourists from foreign countries if those countries don't accept the return of detainees. Foreign Minister Penny Wong did an interview with Andrew Clennell yesterday here on Sky, and she seemed to be distancing herself from the idea. Have a listen.
This legislation was about making Australia's immigration system stronger. It was about ensuring that people who don't cooperate with a requirement to return can be penalised. And it was about ensuring that we can have a new power to stop granting visas in certain circumstances to those countries who are refusing to have citizens return. Now, obviously, that's a power which would only be exercised where necessary. It's a power which is one tool in the ways in which we seek to manage the immigration system.
Joe, what do you think about this quite radical reform?
I thought it was actually a really short, sharp and effective and clear way to deal with the problem. It was one of those things which, as soon as I saw it, I could understand how it would work. The messaging on it is really clear and simple and easy to understand, except when Penny Wong explains it. And again, this is, I think, one of the problems with the Labor Party on immigration, which is its Achilles heel and always has been, especially for the left. You actually get this thing and say, right, we're going to get tough on these countries, because the whole problem is that there's nowhere else for these people to go. That's why they end up being let out free, because you can't have indefinite detention. And so the Albanese government put the pressure back on these home countries, says, no, you have to take these people back or we will not take any people from you. It's a fantastic policy, and the coalition should support it instead of blocking it for its own selfish political purposes. But again, you see now the left of the Labor Party, to which of course Penny Wong and Andrew Giles belong, almost sort of tying themselves in knots to get away from it. And as long as they keep doing that, border protection and immigration will continue to be a thorn in the side of the Labor Party. So these people need to just shut up and get out of the way and let it run.
All right, Joe Hildebrand, Liz Storer. Liz, we'll see you tonight at 10 o'clock.
Thanks, Sharri.
Thanks both so much. Now, coming up, an emergency hearing to be held in Bruce Lehrmann's defamation trial against Network 10 just days before a judgment was set to be delivered. I'll speak with legal affairs expert Chris Merritt, plus the Australian Museum's decision to welcome an archaeologist who's made offensive comments about Jews. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, tonight I can reveal a Seven insider is set to detail bombshell allegations that there were other benefits provided to Bruce Lehrmann that have not yet come to light of a dodgy entertainment nature. The shocking claims of how employees at the Seven Network wooed Bruce Lehrmann ahead of an exclusive interview are understood to be included in a sworn affidavit by former Seven producer Taylor Auerbach. Auerbach has been reported as saying that his job was to get Lehrmann over the line for the Spotlight interview and to keep him happy. His claims have not been tested. But sources tell me that it's understood there are further sensational examples of how the program courted Lehrmann, including entertainment that a reasonable person would consider to be dodgy. The end result was this high-rating interview with the Spotlight program, where Lehrmann gave his first tell-all.
That you bullied her on at least one occasion. Is that right?
No, not at all. In fact, I think it was adduced in evidence in the trial that that was not the case.
I can also tonight reveal inside information on how this explosive bid by 10 to reopen the defamation proceedings just days out from Justice Michael Lee delivering a verdict came about. It goes back to late March when news.com.au's Samantha Maiden revealed allegations that Taylor Auerbach had booked 2 very expensive Thai masseuses on a Seven Network corporate card for himself and Lehrmann prior to that exclusive interview. Lehrmann responded to the allegations by describing Auerbach as a disgruntled former Seven employee, and he denied receiving massages. Meanwhile, Seven indicated he'd been given, and this is Taylor Auerbach, he'd been given a written warning and counselled for the spending. Auerbach strongly denied he'd been disciplined at all, and he's threatened to commence proceedings against Lehrmann. It's become known in legal circles that Taylor Auerbach initially contacted high-profile media lawyer Sue Chrysanthu to take on his case. Chrysanthu is a barrister and she already acts for a party in the proceedings, but it's understood she referred Auerbach to a solicitor. As she would normally do, barristers refer clients to solicitors, and the solicitor she referred him to was Rebecca Giles. It's well known that the high-powered pair work together often. Giles took a look at Auerbach's claims and the case that he wanted to pursue just for defamation against Bruce Lehrmann and Channel 7. But she took a look at this material that Auerbach showed her to support his defamation claim, and it's understood that she immediately recognised the private communications between Auerbach and Lehrmann would be relevant to the defamation case that Ten and Lisa Wilkinson are defending against Lehrmann, where Lehrmann is suing over Lisa Wilkinson's original interview with Brittany Higgins. It's understood that within 24 to 48 hours later, Ten was notified that there could be material that they could use in their case. The new information was completely accidental. Auerbach had only intended to sue for defamation. If Lehrmann hadn't called him disgruntled and denied receiving massages, and if Seven hadn't claimed he'd been disciplined, then this explosive turn of events wouldn't be unfolding. But now Auerbach has prepared a sworn affidavit which is believed to claim that Lehrmann provided material to the Spotlight program. Spotlight is Channel 7's investigative program. Now, we do not suggest that Lehrmann has provided the documents to the Seven network, only that Auerbach, who was a producer on the program, claims that Lehrmann did provide them. That claim, as I said, has not been tested, and the affidavit has not been read into evidence. News.com.au's Sam Maiden reports that Mr. Lehrmann's lawyers have previously told the federal court that he is not responsible for the leaking of Ms. Higgins' private phone records that were obtained under subpoena during the criminal trial. And Lehrmann's barrister, Matthew Richardson SC, told the court, and I quote, "In correspondence last night and in the written submissions provided to Your Honour, the allegation was made. It was the obvious inference that my client has provided materials to Seven even in breach of his Harmon obligations. He absolutely denies that. It is a grave and serious allegation. It's aggravating the damages in this case." Well, we haven't seen Auerbach's affidavit yet, but we understand it relates to fresh evidence in the proceedings. Lawyers for Ten and Lisa Wilkinson hope that the affidavit containing the allegations will be tendered to court if Justice Michael Lee agrees to their application to reopen the case. The matter will be heard tomorrow at 5 p.m, and we'll bring you all the news on this show tomorrow night at 8 p.m. If Auerbach produces evidence that directly contradicts Lehrmann's claims, and if supported by documentation, it would go to Lehrmann's credibility. Ten is understood to be keen to have the allegations tested as a matter relevant to Lehrmann's credit as a witness. The implications for Lehrmann are significant. The fact that Ten has taken the extraordinary step of approaching the judge for leave to reopen the case just days out from a verdict indicates that Ten must have formed the view that whatever Auerbach's allegations are, it is so important that the judge needs to hear the evidence in order to make his decision. Now, for disclosure, I should mention that I knew Taylor Auerbach when he was a copy kid at the Sunday Telegraph some 15 or so years ago, and then he was briefly employed by Sky News this year before all of this unfolded, which led to his departure from the network. Now, Lehrmann is suing over Lisa Wilkinson's original interview with Brittany Higgins. Lehrmann was never convicted of sexual assault, and he maintains his innocence. Now, if Justice Lee decides to reopen this case, which is the big question now, then there's no question that Auerbach's evidence will be explosive. All right, joining me now, the Rule of Law Institute of Australia's Chris Merritt. Chris, thank you so much for your time this evening. Look, it looks like this defamation case may carry on for longer than planned.
It's certainly carried on long enough already. I would say those who hold that view would certainly include Justice Lee. He must be spitting chips, I would imagine, at the very prospect of having to stop and start again and hear more evidence and then rewrite his judgment just on the eve of it. But look, the proceedings as they stand now, could be absolutely dynamite. Without going into the details, by putting on extra evidence, it seems pretty likely that what 10 is seeking to do is to eventually exclude some evidence that's already been presented in court. Now, the reasons for that I'm not going to go into. Nothing's privileged at the moment. We don't know the contents of what's going to be put before the court. But I'll make this point. This could be the first step in a chain of events that could eventually cost Bruce Lehrmann thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of dollars in damages if he were to win this case. It could be, and this is speculation, but it could be the first step towards excluding evidence that goes to the question of malice. Now, in the world of defamation, malice is not what the Oxford English Dictionary would describe it to be. It's a collateral purpose. So if, for example, the Higgins interview with Wilkinson is found to have a collateral purpose, that would be malice. And I suspect that at this very late stage, 10 may have stumbled across something which their lawyers believe they have an obligation to present to the court. Now, when new evidence comes along, lawyers and judges really they're under an enormous amount of pressure to reopen a case and hear it. If they don't, there's always a possibility of an appeal point. So I feel a great deal of sympathy for Justice Lee. Whichever way he goes, it's a bad outcome. This case has been going on forever, and it looks as though it's about to enter another chapter. If he doesn't allow that chapter to proceed, there could well be separate appeal points taken, which is a dreadful outcome. But that's where we stand. We'll find out more at 5 o'clock tomorrow.
No, we will indeed. And look, I should note that the new evidence that's said to be contained in Taylor Auerbach's affidavit doesn't actually relate to any allegations of rape itself, but it more goes to, as I said in my comments a moment ago, it more goes to the credibility or credit of the witness, of Bruce Lehrmann. So, given it doesn't go to the central allegations, Chris Merritt, do you think then that it's likely that Justice Michael Lee might decide not to reopen the case, or do you think that point that you just made about the prospect of an appeal will be weighing on his mind?
Look, tactically, he could proceed. He could decide, no, I'm going to hand down this judgment and leave it to an appeal court to make a decision on damages based on this. It would be very unusual. I think the normal process would involve the trial judge hearing all the evidence and ruling on damages. It's been an enormous case. There's been lots of witnesses, and the trial judge is always best to make these decisions. And I think Justice Lee would not want to leave any loose ends. Yeah.
Well, it's going to be a big day. 5 o'clock tomorrow will be the decision, and I'll bring everyone the news tomorrow night at 8 o'clock. We've got another lawyer joining us, Sam Macedoni, for full analysis. Chris Merritt, really appreciate your time. Now, in unsettling news, I can reveal that the Australian Museum has invited a renowned Egyptian archaeologist to give a lecture, despite the fact that he's made clearly offensive comments about Jews in the past. Dr. Zaha Hawass is to give a lecture as part of the current Ramses and the Gold of the Pharaohs exhibition. Dr. Hawass has previously said that Israel is the Zionist enemy. I gave this enemy a strong slap in the face. He's also had this to say in an interview.
التشريد بتاعهم ده
منتشر في العالم كله.
في العالم كله. قوة راحوا أمريكا، سيطروا على اقتصاد أمريكا. طبعا هم عندهم تخطيطهم كله إن هم القلة بتاعتهم سيطرت على كل العالم. يعني
Now, these comments were made in 2011. We reached out to the museum, and this was their spokesperson's response to us tonight. They said, Dr. Hawass is a world-renowned Egyptologist and an advocate for the conservation of Egypt's ancient monuments. Dr. Hawass is the curator of the Ramses and the Gold of the Pharaohs exhibition, which was produced by the World Heritage Exhibitions. They said Dr. Hawass regularly speaks to audiences around the world and is visiting Sydney as part of his commitment to the exhibition. They said it is their understanding that the claims made against Dr. Hawass, surely they didn't mean to say the claims made against Dr. Hawass, maybe by Dr. Hawass, date from 2009 and 2011, and that he has fully rejected the characterisation of these views. Well, joining me now is former Defence Intelligence Analyst Paul Monk. Paul, great to see you again. Look, what do you think about this?
Sharri.
They're hailing someone as a prestigious visiting guest, and of course he is that, but he has also made very offensive comments about Jews in the past. If this were anyone else who'd made such offensive comments about another group of individuals, they would be cancelled by our society, not held up in such high esteem.
Absolutely. I mean, the comments that he made, which you quoted directly, could have been lifted straight out of the notorious Protocols of the Elders of Zion. They're most flagrant anti-Semitism, and there's no informed or responsible person who could deny that. So, to be a little facetious, it seems to me he is a strong candidate for being harassed while he's out here. Many people get harassed because of views that they express, sometimes ill-considered views, to be sure, but the views he's advanced should be condemned in no uncertain terms. And the fact that he's not even being criticised, much less, as we would say, deplatformed, is a mark against the Australian Museum. People have lost their jobs, they've been sacked from positions for far less than the comments that he manifestly made.
No, absolutely. I mean, people are losing their jobs for using the wrong pronouns, even accidentally. And here's someone who has said very offensive comments about Jews. Sure, it was 2009 and 2011, but he was an adult when he made them. It wasn't like he was a teenager. So, you know, it is offensive. We do
absolutely.
know.
And
continue.
Oh, I was just going to say, he ought to be asked in an interview, one way or another, while he's here, do you retract those comments? Do you admit that they were outrageous, that they were straight out of the Protocols of the Elders of Zion?
Yes.
And my guess is he would try and dodge the question, or he might even put his foot right in the rabbit hole and reiterate sentiments of that kind, in which case he's condemned out of his own mouth.
The Australian Museum also sent us comments that Dr. Hawass had made previously, where he says he's not an anti-Semite, he's got nothing against the Jews. He says the Jews are his best friends. 95% of my good friends were Jews, but they agree with me completely. So there you go, very unusual comments.
Well, I mean, just take his statement that the Jews have a plan and they control the entire world. That's the essence of historical anti-Semitism, you know,
Yes.
and it really needs to be held to account.
Yeah. And by the way, this hasn't been reported before. We're reporting it now for the first time tonight. So presumably the Australian Museum will come under pressure over this tomorrow if other media outlets follow this up. Now, Paul, former Prime Minister Scott Morrison has said on a podcast that he thinks China has the potential to be a democracy. Have a listen.
There's a view that some put around that, oh, you know, democracy can't work in Chinese culture. Well, it's crap. I've been to Taiwan. There's nothing inherently anti-democratic in the ethnic genes of people of Chinese descent. They care just as much about freedom as we do. Sadly, in mainland China, they don't have the opportunity for it.
Paul, I think what a lot of people forget is that while, there has been the communist regime in China, about 15 years ago, and Alexander Downer speaks about this when he was foreign minister, China was far less aggressive than it is at the moment. There has definitely been a shift in the Communist Party's approach under Xi.
Absolutely has. 2 points need to be made very clear about this. The first is that Scott Morrison is absolutely correct when he says that there is nothing intrinsic to Chinese ethnicity, Chinese language, Chinese culture, which would prevent China from becoming a democracy. What stands in the way of China becoming a democracy is the Chinese Communist Party. It made the decision in 1989 to brutally crush a democracy movement. And throughout its rule, it has crushed those who have called for democratic reforms in the 1950s, in the 1960s, in the 1970s, in the 80s, in the 1990s. Liu Xiaobo, helped bring together in 2008 the Charter 08 calling for democratic reforms of a perfectly sensible kind in China. He was imprisoned and he died in prison. That's the Communist Party. It's not Chinese culture. And the second thing that needs to be said is that they've had every chance since the 1980s to show that they are capable of moving in the direction that the Kuomintang did in Taiwan and allowing the political participation of other organisations, allowing the opening up of civil society. Not only have they not done that, Xi Jinping has explicitly ruled it out. He's going in the opposite direction. So we now need to be really clear. There can be democracy in China. It will not happen under the Chinese Communist Party. It will certainly not happen under Xi Jinping.
And look,
which
no
means
one knows.
Xi Jinping needs to die or go.
Oh, and he's already, what is he? Is he 80 now? How old is she?
No, he's only in his late 60s. He could be around,
60s.
unfortunately, for quite a while.
Yeah, all right. Well, that's even more disappointing. All right. No one knows more about this topic than you, Paul Monk. Paul was the head of the China desk at the Defence Intelligence Organisation, so an expert indeed. Right, coming up, support for Labor is slipping according to the latest polls. So does the Prime Minister have a succession plan? Plus calls for the government to reverse the decision to strip Mike Pezzullo of his Order of Australia. An exclusive we revealed days ago. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, support for Labor is slipping in WA, with the latest Newspoll finding that the coalition is ahead of Labor in the two-party preferred results. The coalition is up 51% to Labor's 49% in WA, down 6 points from the election, and it's young people that are driving a lot of this change. Overall, though, the Newspoll found that Labor is still ahead of the coalition, 52 to 48. Well, joining me now, Headline Advisory Director Andrew Carswell, former media advisor to Scott Morrison, and GXO Strategies Director Cameron Milner, former Chief of Staff to Bill Shorten. Great to see you both. And I should mention this is our weekly Monday Political Insiders panel. Andrew, how worrying is this result for the government, and how significant is it that the coalition could be looking to pick up seats in WA?
Well, it's certainly troubling for Anthony Albanese. I mean, they are clearly on the nose in WA. And this is what happens when you take mining for granted. When you take mining for granted, you take Western Australia for granted. And the people of WA, they're smart people. They've cottoned on to the fact that they're being taken for granted here. And it's having a direct result on the poll numbers over there. I mean, they are in line to lose 2 seats pretty quickly and going backwards into minority government. But this is a government that has just decided not to support the mineral sector in any way, and in fact penalise the mineral sector. They don't even want to acknowledge it. I mean, we have a treasurer who can't really bring himself to even say the word mining. I mean, if you go through his transcripts of his budget speech, his economic updates, his national accounts press conferences, the last time he mentioned the word mining, September 22. It's a long time ago. They just do not want to acknowledge it. I mean, in his budget speech, he said he referred to mining as things we send overseas. They can't bring themselves to even say it, let alone support it. And that is the problem. And you've got industrial relations policy, you've got environmental policies that are going to just push out approvals, bring down investment and bring down job creation as a result as well. It's no wonder WA are bolting.
What do you think this means for the general election, Cameron Milner?
Well, I mean, they're not on the nose in Western Australia, they're on the nose in my home state of Queensland too. Federal Labor is not doing what they need to do to win the seats in Queensland, and they're going back in New South Wales as well. So it's all heading towards minority government. We're now heading towards a situation where Albanese's first term will look like Gillard's first term, which is a deal with the Greens, which is diabolical, or even worse, a deal with the Teals. No, I mean, Labor should be doing more in office to get their primary up, and they aren't. And we're looking towards a Labor minority government. Albo might be happy to be PM, but it won't be a Labor government and it won't be delivering for Labor families if the Greens are in charge or the Teals.
No, absolutely. Now, let's go to our exclusive from Thursday night's show, where we revealed that former Home Affairs Secretary Mike Pezzullo has been told that he's going to be stripped of his Order of Australia that was given to him in 2020. Since then, many have thrown their support behind Pezzullo. They've even called for the Prime Minister to intervene and reverse the decision. Shadow Home Affairs Affairs Minister James Paterson said stripping his AO is incredibly petty. The PM should intervene to stop it. Then just today, Strategic Analysis Australia Director Peter Jennings said that stripping Pizzulo of a deserved Order of Australia awarded 4 years ago for a significant career in national security is unacceptably punitive. If it happens, the government will claim it's the result of independent processes. Be assured that nothing in Canberra happens unless the Prime Minister wants it. Well, we asked the Prime Minister's office whether Albanese was going to reverse the decision. A government spokesman has told us this is a standard review automatically triggered by the Australian Public Service Commission findings. It is independent from government and still ongoing. Questions about the process should be directed to the Honours Council. So, Andrew, there you go. As Peter Jennings predicted, the Albanese government is saying, oh, nothing to do with us. This is an independent process.
Well, Peter Jennings is rarely wrong, and he's certainly right on this occasion. I mean, this is just childish. I mean, absolutely, Pizzulo showed a little bit of an error of judgment in cozying up to government in the way he did. But the punishment doesn't fit the crime. We're talking about little gossipy messages being sent on text. It's hardly warranting the removal of such an award. I mean, what you can't take away from Mike Pizzulo is the incredible amount of accomplishment that he achieved as one of Australia's strongest public servants in an era where he had to knit together a monster portfolio department. And add to that the fact that he was pivotal in Operation Sovereign Borders. I mean, the dude deserves his award and more, and yet it's being stripped away or potentially being stripped away by petty politics.
Yeah. Look, I went through on Thursday night the reasons, the findings against him, so I'm not going to go through the detail of those now. But ultimately, Andrew, you are right. They were gossipy messages with a political lobbyist. Cameron, most people who have their Order of Australia stripped or other honours stripped, pretty much all of them are where there has been a criminal conviction, serious crimes or pedophilia. It's the complete opposite with Pizzulo.
Absolutely. And look how good the borders are under O'Neill and Giles right now without Pizzulo's influence. Pizzulo stopped the boats and kept us safe. And he deserves the AO for that alone. But he was a servant of the Labor Party many years ago, a fine public servant. He does not need to have this retrospectively done to him. And to your point, it's not a fraud or criminal act that he's undertaken. It was a error of judgment that hurt no one in the end. And so, yes, it would be incredibly petty politics to remove this AO from him, given how well he did in the service of this country.
All right, well, look, given how Albanese has been slipping in the polls, the Sydney Morning Herald has done this big piece today on the candidates for Labor leader, the succession plan. Andrew Carswell, what I think is most disturbing about this report. Look, I've been reporting for a long time that Tony Burke considers himself a leadership candidate. I've said how ridiculous that is. But the Herald today says that he's the next most obvious leadership candidate. What a joke.
Well, Sharri, it's a roll gold list of underachievement, this article. Yes, he does view himself as a future leader, but the problem is he's disliked by his own faction. You throw Chris Bowen in the mix as well. He considers himself as a future leader. Tanya Plibersek as a future leader as well. They've hardly covered themselves in glory in the last couple of years. The only one that really rises above the mediocre pack here is the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers. I mean, he's the only one that can cut through.
I couldn't agree more.
To a degree where you can say
he's all three of us would agree on that point. All three of us would probably agree on that point.
Absolutely. I mean, he's the master of the one-liners. He can cut through. He's good on TV. He's very measured in the way that he approaches things. The rest, well, they can take a number.
Yeah, Cameron Milner, what do you think?
Well, I'm an unavowed and big fan of Jim Chalmers. I think he'll be the next Labor Prime Minister. But that said, there are others in caucus as well. I mean, I've got a lot of time for Tanya Plibersek. I think she's very good. Michelle Rowland's excellent. The next generations are represented by people like Andrew Charlton, who's demonstrating that wealth's no impediment to doing well inside Labor Party. There's a whole lot of people coming through. But the reality is that Albo won't choose his successor. The factions and the unions will choose the successor. Albo will be long gone by the time the next leader is chosen by the Labor Party and Labor Party machinery. And I think that's why Jim Chalmers will be an excellent choice when that time comes.
All right. Andrew Carswell, Cameron Milner, thank you both very much for your time tonight. Now, after the break, Joe Biden facing backlash after the White House's subversion of Easter Sunday. Plus, Trump lashed in an effort to get Biden. Kosha Gada will join me in a moment. Welcome back. Well, now to the United States, where President Joe Biden has ridiculed one of the most significant holidays in the Christian calendar. Biden has officially declared Easter Sunday Transgender Day of Visibility. He wrote in a social media post today, "We show millions of transgender and non-binary Americans that we see them, they belong, and they should be treated with dignity and respect." Of course, that's all true, but the question is why on Easter Sunday, and he has been condemned for this move. Joining me now, Sky News contributor Kosha Gada. Kosha, great to see you. What's been the reaction to Biden doing this on Easter Sunday?
Hi, Sharri. Great to be with you. It definitely seems to have set off a firestorm this year. You know, I was looking into it actually, and I wasn't that familiar with this day myself because it never received such a firestorm before. It actually was established in 2009 by a US-based youth advocacy group, and since then it's globalized and expanded. Biden actually proclaimed March 31st to be this day when he took office back in 2021. But this year, March 31st happened to fall on the same day as Easter. And that is why I think a lot of people find this very divisive and very incendiary, because he and his counterparts in Christian majority countries around the world, our own Penny Wong, I think stepped in hot water as well. Yes. Canada, elsewhere, this has become a big thing because it feels like they're amplifying this day, superseding or over and above Easter. And the second thing is that this issue is very controversial if we're very honest about it. You know, it's not just about belonging and inclusiveness and all that, which I think most people agree with. It is about language policing. It's about, you know, what falls in our children's curricula. It's about the conflict of transgender rights with women's rights in sports and prison cells and everything else. And so a lot of people just see it on the holiest day of the Christian calendar, amplifying that as sort of a slap in the face. And I think that's why he's sort of kicked off this firestorm.
Donald Trump has also drawn criticism this weekend after posting a video on social media that contains the horrific image of Joe Biden tied up on the rear of a passing truck. Kosha, why would he do this given the claims that he's already facing of encouraging violence?
You know, I think this is classic Trump and not the best version of him. When we speak of amplification, I think it was something a supporter of his put on a truck. He amplified that on Truth Social. And it is something that makes a lot of people who support him, his supporters, because that's, I think, the more interesting group. Obviously, the people who dislike him, this just feeds into that. But this makes it difficult for supporters to continue to support that approach that he has. I will say that, unfortunately, since we've crossed the Rubicon in so many ways in terms of just the viciousness and how dirty politics has gotten in the US over the years, and it seems to be at a fever pitch now, on top of the fact that people are sort of used to Trump, he's done this kind of thing before, it doesn't quite spark as much furor from his base as it would have maybe 4 or 5 years ago. But I think most people would agree that we just, you know, wish he didn't do this because it doesn't help and he doesn't need to do it.
Exactly. Look, we're out of time. Kosha Gada, great to see you as always tonight. And look, I hope everyone at home has had a wonderful long weekend, long Easter weekend. For those of you visiting church, I hope you had a holy time. We had a beautiful Easter weekend with my family. I was just telling Paul Murray in the ad break, we went to the Easter show yesterday. The kids absolutely loved it. Cannot believe how expensive the Easter show bags are. I remember as a kid, they were like $10. $30 for just a Peppa Pig or Bluey show bag. Extraordinary. I'll see you tomorrow at 8. Here's Paul Murray.